Good evening, everyone, or good day, depending on when you're listening. We're recording in the evening. My name's Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Monte Cooper, IP lawyer, and I'll just say that none of our opinions reflect our employers or should be considered legal advice, because we're going to talk about giant monsters. And that doesn't happen in real life. I mean, maybe a big alligator, but that just doesn't happen. And Monty, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me, Josh.
Always. Well, for those who haven't met Monty, or go listen to some of our older episodes, because Monty's the grandnephew of Merian Cooper, who created King Kong and a bunch of other fantastic adventure stories. And Grandpa did a few cool things too. And you definitely have the kaiju bug in you, because we've talked about Kong and Godzilla, and we've done that at Comic-Con together. And here we are to talk about Monarch Legacy of Monsters. And this is like the first four episodes that will touch on a few legal issues throughout it. Monty, first things first, what do you think of the show?
Well, I am no pun intended, a monster fan of the show. I believe it's one of Apple TV's best introductions of sci-fi content, and Apple TV has done multiple shows that I've enjoyed, including, in addition, what's ongoing at the same time, the current season of For All Mankind, as well as Foundation and some others. But I think this one is special. I really do. I think, for one thing, I'm going to say something that may come as blasphemy for some of our listeners, but I'm saying it from the heart. Of the Universal Monsterverse, I think it's the best introduction. I like it better than all four movies.
Well, one of the things that it has that many of the movies don't is human characters you actually care about and a human plot. I mean, it proves you can do a human story, and that we're all not here just for monster punch monster. Sure, that's cool. It's rewarding, and we do have cool kaiju in this, but there's a human story set after G-Day, the Godzilla versus the other Titans in the 2014 Godzilla movie. And it's thoughtful. It gives you things to consider, to debate about. And I enjoy Kurt Russell and seeing his son Wyatt. They do look like Wyatt should know this is what I could look like in 50 years. So like that's they have very similar eyes, like with the way that they're filmed. So like
I
it's very creative.
I I was watching the most recent episode, I brought Anne in because there comes a moment in the movie or in the episode where they magnificently transform the face of Wyatt into the current face of Kurt Russell, transitioning from the 50s to the current, and the astonishing look that you can see. That my wife was sitting next to me, and I turned to her and I go, Goldie Hawn just has to be hating this. It's like, don't I have anything in him? It's like his resemblance to Kurt is uncanny.
Yeah, I guess that was the dominant gene. I mean, he might have mom's mannerisms, like who knows? Like that's a study in of itself. But it's thoughtful. And again, being the 80s kid that I am, it's nice to see Kurt Russell in action being Kurt Russell. Like it's fun. Uh Now we get some big legal issues right out of the gate, and the first being bigamy, because the plot is Bill Randa's son apparently has two families, a family in Japan and Tokyo and one in San Francisco, California. And it's the daughter from the San Francisco marriage thinks dad is dead after the events of 2014. She finds his keys that lead her to Tokyo, and she opens this apartment door and finds the other wife and the son from that marriage. And she's rightfully upset. the rules on bigamy. Now, I'll just say I'm a civil litigator. I don't do family law. Monte, your IP and other litigation. Neither one of
I'm
it.
not.
This is not our practice area. So there might be some family law lawyers who jump in, but the general rule of thumb is you can't get double married. That you only have one spouse at a time. And in California, the marriage that happened first is the one that stays valid. And the second one is viewed as contrary to law and just invalid out of the gate. Now, some might say, like, well, they're married in two different countries. Not a defense. California courts would recognize a marriage from Japan, and I will not speak for Japan, but pretty positive they're going to recognize a marriage from the United States. So that's not a defense of, don't worry, I'm only married in California. It's cool to get married in Tokyo. That's not okay. The second marriage will be invalidated. What was your reaction to this? Because again, lawyers, we think about this stuff.
Well, first of all, I'm going to qualify all of this with as a lawyer, the first thing I did think of is what is the conflicts of law? Because Japan is not a common law country. It's a quasi almost like the French constitutional basis. It's something, and I have no idea what Japan's statutory basis is for bigamistic relationships. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, there is a set of really valuable property that, and by the way, I got to qualify before I even start saying anything. How much spoiler free am I supposed to be, and how much?
This is we in order to do legal analysis, we have to spoil it. So like swing for the fences here.
Okay, so you have a San Francisco-based daughter of a wife who has been married to a man who simultaneously is married in Tokyo and has fathered a son. On top of everything else, California, of course, has common law palimony rights. He didn't even need to be married out here in California to potentially give rise to rights of the wife who lives in California. But one thing you will notice in the movie is he divides his estate. Half of his assets are in California, just because he's leading a life with his daughter and wife out here, and half of his estate is in Tokyo. And that means, where is the who has the right to declare the assets of the estate even dividable in the event that he's dead? Second of all, which wife was married first? I assume you're right that it's the California one, but it's never 100% clear that is in fact the case. What I can say is it appears the daughter is the elder child. And I'm going to go to my gaming side, my Xbox side, to give you the cheat, and then I will give you the legal or the in-series reason I think it's also hinted that she is. The cheat is she's in her 30s as an actress and he's 24. There's about a 9-year difference between the two, and it's hard not to notice it even as you watch the series. The second, that's my Xbox cheat, is I just happen to know the difference in the age of the actor and actress. But there are some things said in the series that she has been a full-blown teacher, and in fact her PTSD understandably is rooted in her having watched almost her entire class fall to their death from the Golden Gate Bridge when Godzilla went through. And it's substantially important part of her character, as that she is suffering severe PTSD as a result of those events. Whereas the kid is shown to be recently graduated and has his first opportunity to be an artist. They're both young adults, but I think it's clear she's the elder. Now, having said that, I'm not sure who the first wife is. And I think between Japan and the United States, that might be the most important determinative fact. And if you know the answer, I'm curious to know what facts you think tell you precisely which one is the one he engaged in a relationship first, because both women are both about the same age.
Yeah, I can't tell. I mean, I agree with the age of the kids because the daughter is more established in life. She has a career, and Junior is has more of a like daddy's boy complex of wanting to know his dad. The daughter's over that. And he has his art exhibit that we see in the most recent episode. Uh, I think I agree that I clearly agree. She's older, not by much, but who was married first is the pivotal question here.
And and the Japanese mother has photos from the 60s at least, or 50s even maybe. How does she have those unless she has an early relationship with the father?
Highly possible, or he, you know, kept that photo album with that family. Like it's a really weird and dangerous game to play because that means he isn't on social media, and which is, I guess, good if you're going to have that kind of conspiracy. Uh, because, but what about the rest of his family? Like if they're posting pictures of like dad on vacation, like at some point facial recognition technology might pick up on on that, and that could be a thing. Uh,
On
and
the other hand, the American has the keys to both the apartment in Japan and her own, which strongly suggests the trust issue went to the elder. Yeah,
yes,
and I'm going to totally blow with your mind, and now you get to give your opinion on a fact that could be a theory I've been working with. What if there's a third wife?
oh God, I mean that would that that highlights the need for a therapist in a really big way of like, why do you keep getting married, dude? Like what? Okay, so your mom died when you were 2 or 3. Sad. That doesn't mean act out by getting married on different continents. uh the fact that his safe code involved both wives and both kids would hint that there isn't a third faction in play. But who knows with this dude? Like he's making some really bad life choices. One of the things I was concerned about is there's multiple levels of fraud here. What about fraud with his employers? Like, did he disclose to one a marriage and not the other? Because HR would notice that. And is he just funneling his pay from Monarch to shell companies? Again, HR could notice that unless he's funneling it a couple times. So if it goes to shell company one, and then they're cut off from knowing what happens next, and then funnels off assets to company that's in Japan that's supposed to be doing software development or whatever as the cover story, and software company in the US. And that's where, the wife in San Francisco gets her insurance benefits, and where she sees income, being deposited into bank accounts. And a similar thing happening in Tokyo, because there's a lot of paperwork in being alive. Insurance coverage is one of those things that's highly noticed and something work takes a part in. So unless Monarch knows about one and he's just funneling his money to, it could be another shell corporation. So it could be straight down, and that's the San Francisco family. And then he has a shell corporation where money's going in for the Japanese family. Like, how do you deal with that? Because when the Monarch rogue agents go into the Japanese wife's condo, they're shocked that it's Randa's condo. They weren't expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know, which means there's an element of fraud at play. on him covering up the second family, or perhaps both families.
I my my impression is that it's both families. Monarch doesn't seem to know much about the daughter at the outset of the series. Now, at least you could take the position that they didn't care. But let's start with the 800-pound gorilla that's in this whole equation of HR, and to a degree some of the rights that would accrue from fraud. And I'm just going to put it out there. Who in the hell is funding Monarch? Is it a U.S. federal agency like the NSA that gets funded under, black budget from Congress? It sure doesn't seem that way, because it seems like members of the government don't even understand who Monarch is.
Yeah.
And that begs the question, if they're not funded by the government, who is funding their HR?
The questions that come up is with the 1950s flashback that we see Monarch eventually get funded from the US Army. So they end up as a black ops project in the 50s. Are they smart with money? Do they start developing patents themselves and become self-operational? Like there's problems with government oversight, because Congress exists, to make sure, as oversight, to make sure we don't have rogue agencies running around. Now you get into all kinds of issues with what can be stated in a public hearing, what has to be done in the secret soundproof ones, the things that we've learned from the UAP hearings, with who can talk about what and where. But like, they still have an idea what the checkbook is to fund all the different agencies. Even if, I don't think the CIA still has a secret budget. I think that's stopped, but I haven't been paying close attention to.
They have line items that can be blacked because they can go to defense projects that the public hasn't been made aware of yet. So I believe it's not that their budget is black, but that specific line items are, which is understandable.
Yeah, it's the, there's the joke that Aurora, that was supposed to be the successor to the SR-71, was disclosed to Congress in a 17-page typo.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, it's something my dad told me. So again, don't know if it's true, but again, the idea of like, what's this? Oh, it's a typo. It's 17 pages. How? We'll take that back now, and we'll never discuss the unpleasantness again. So does Monarch have that kind of monster size budget? But even then, how do they get funded? And if you're going to have an army of people working for you, you have HR and you have employee rights that we don't want ignored. Like, as a society, we value employee rights, that we're not turning back to the clock to children weaving clothes and working in coal mines and Upton St. Clair's, the jungle. Like we want employee safety. Monster hunting would have some serious employee safety issues.
Well, from the very introduction of Monarch, when we first see it in hints in Godzilla, and then more overtly in Skull Island, there have been strong indicia that there's an internal struggle in Monarch. And we're even seeing it in the current season, that some members of Monarch are more open-minded, you might say. You might say are willing to accommodate different viewpoints more than others. It was best exemplified perhaps by John Goodman's character in Skull Island, who seemed to be trying more from a scientific premise to figure out what the Titans were. And he was clashing, of course, with Samuel L. Jackson's character, who just wanted to kill him. and that theme has followed Monarch into the various versions of the series that have followed. And so there is an element that it's not even clear Monarch is a unified has a unified vision, and it sure hasn't been shown who is technically the head of it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a character for the future, I think. Yeah.
I think at this time period, Serizawa is supposed to be in charge, but if it is a large, complex, yeah, government agency, you can have factions in it. Like you can have odd behavior taking place of those who might be more hawkish and those who are more dovish. There are different presidential administrations where you look at Bush too. You had Powell in State Department who was more on the dove side, and you had Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld who was more on the hawk side, and like with just very different views on how to go forward. Are we seeing that kind of breakout in Monarch?
I think we are, personally. I think in particular, episode 4 may have shown it overtly. It's no longer clear the character who's been chasing the two kids, whether his motivations are entirely nefarious.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on all the others, but there's a part of me that just feels like each movie seems to introduce like a new wing of Monarch. And this new series seems to be showing a Monarch. It first of all, there's a cryptic comment from Kurt Russell in the most recent episode when he's asked how long has Monarch existed, and he says since sometime in the 40s. I think both of us can probably agree that might be a reference to investigation of the ship that we learn in the current series was taken by a Titan, and that John Goodman's future character witnessed, and we learned he was correct, that his theory was that there was monsters behind it. And I think there's an implication that event somehow precipitates the investigation that becomes Monarch. It's still cryptic because we don't know because as of 1952, they don't know that Titans exist. They have suspicions, but they don't know. That we see in the first 2 episodes.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's the dragon that we see when it's like, oh, it's real.
Yeah.
The lot to unpack. So if Monarch started out with Randa running around by himself, like he wasn't on a government ticket initially. So did Monarch start private and turn public? That's and it might have. They might have started out as, I don't know if he was funding it himself or if he had backers somehow. Or heck, it could even be another branch of the US government funding him on his, solo expedition where he bumps into the other team, and they then coincide and they have different skill sets and they learn to work together. But even by Skull Island time period, Goodman's begging for funding in order to do this one-off expedition. So like they're not a powerhouse. Is it Skull Island that allows them to get their footing? And thinking back to the post-credit scene, probably.
I agree. I think that's intended to be the critical moment.
I mean, which would make sense during the scary Cold War years. And, by the time of, Vietnam era and Nixon first term, like that could make sense. Like that they were going.
I think what we may be seeing, and it's funny because all this started with you asking about HR benefits.
Yeah.
And we're both trying to figure out who gives those benefits to it. But my personal theory is that Monarch started out something like NASA, who people forget is a civilian force. It's not an agency of the Air Force like many people assume.
Yeah.
It's its own civilian agency. And I think the implication is in 1973, once the military formally encounters Kong, it changes that they view it as a defense issue. Because in the 50s, you see the trailers from like Bikini Atoll and Godzilla going into the water and that. but they don't know about Godzilla until 2014. At least that's what the current Monarch suspects, but they don't know. I think you're right. I think the issue is in 1973 they come to realize there are monsters.
And did Monarch militarize themselves? Because in the King of the Monsters movie, where we have that Senate hearing, where Serizawa ends up in contempt by walking out of a live hearing. Don't do that. That's how you get in contempt. The military wants to take over Monarch. So that makes it sound like it's a separate entity entirely, maybe like a militarized NASA, which would be weird. It'd be like NOAA with guns. Like, you guys are supposed to go out and take care of buoys and watch the weather. Why are you armed all of a sudden? And is that Monarch? Like, did they militarize? Because again, King of the Monsters, they have the giant flying wing, and they have military people assigned to them. So it's a very unique beast.
There is legal precedent at a really obscure level that you might have a really personal interest in. Throughout the 1700s into the early 20th century, American armies were largely the state militias.
Yep.
And that's because the U.S. Constitution divides power between the states, who get to control the militias, and Congress, which gets to control the army. And it goes back to very early in the history of the revolution. The founders were very terrified of standing armies, and they felt that, and in fact, the revolution really was won by the militias. But many people don't realize the militias continued all the way into like the Civil War and up through maybe the Spanish-American War. The change came when Congress decided to start incorporating the militias as the U.S. National Guard and incorporating them as a special agency of the U.S. armies, which became controlled in World War I as the integration of the National Guard, and hence the state militias, into the formal U.S. armies. And it transitioned to that this day, the National Guard has elements that the governors can control still under the state militia powers, but the U.S. government could federalize at any moment to become part of the U.S. Army.
Yeah, there's, during the Civil War, we had states raising their armies for the Union Army, but we also had the Grand Army of the Republic. I mean,
correct,
or the Potomac. So it got weird, but we don't quite have that anymore. It's a different, when someone joins the army, they join the army. Or they can go join the National Guard, which is still part of the army, but it's the California National Guard. And they're the ones normally deployed first in times of war. So, but that does raise interesting questions on, did Monarch start that way and then turn into something else? Because by now by the story, it's a behemoth. And after Godzilla appears and fights two other monsters, people are going to notice that. Like, that would have a society changing effect. One of the things that we see is the Godzilla drill in Japan in the first episode. That would be happening all over the planet, with bunkers being built, learning to, in San Francisco, go hide in BART, but you don't have that in San Jose. Like, it'd be like a very 1950s Cold War attitude of, what do you do if one of those things comes ashore? It's also interesting to see that they, at least in Japan, they view Godzilla as a threat, as opposed to, the way that 2014 ends with people thinking Godzilla is the savior of San Francisco for stopping the other monsters, and doesn't go on a rampage at the end. So again, it would alter society, definitely on the coasts, unless one pops into Denver, and then people in the middle of then if it's in Chicago, people are going to pay attention that it could land in Iowa next. So like we have to, everyone's got to be ready for this uh, nuclear twister. Uh, but this started with a discussion about employee rights and, you know, benefits.
I know. I apologize.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's funny. A part of the question really comes down to who is paying those benefits.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
like
mean, seriously.
we're looking at government-sized budgets for what they have, so that makes sense. It would be the U.S. government writing the check. The other question that I have is inheritance, because if Randa Jr.'s dead, then the wives are, you know, things will get messy, and unless they just decide to take the view that we're only going to go after the property in our respective countries, uh, you know, and they just basically ignore the question of who came first marriage wise. But the kids could have an issue of fighting about inheritance on as well, because like both are direct line to dad, both would have rights to challenge wills. It's a, or if there's no will and we're dealing with intestate succession, at least in California, there's an order of priority how that works between separate property and community property, and you know the adult child's right to interfere for like not community property. So it get messy and bizarre, and it's way outside what I do every day at work. So I'm not quite sure where all the chips are going to fall, but I do know it would be messy and lawyers would have a nosebleed. Because it'd be one thing if it's Reno versus San Francisco. Tokyo versus San Francisco is a whole new layer of complexity, because now we need Japanese lawyers who understand probate law in Japan.
and and the assets are, for our audience, if they're familiar with the term, quasi and rem, meaning that they are identified by the location where they exist. And in this case, it's been made clear from the series that they're in two different countries. There is an apartment with assets in Tokyo, and there is an apartment with assets in the United States. And I'm going to throw out one that is a very real probability, not even possibility, but probability. He was living a double life that completely deceived two wives and two children. I would surmise he has two wills.
Oh, most likely. I mean, that actually might make it easier. I mean, if it's not challenged, and if they're written in a way that they complement each other, but that would mean a lawyer knowing about it, and that raises a weird crime fraud exception. That if a lawyer knew that he was committing a crime and that advised him on estate planning, knowing that he was committing a crime, that's a weird spin on the crime fraud exception, because then that legal advice isn't protected,
That's
and
correct.
you're not supposed to advise people on how to commit crimes. So he could have been very smart and just asked questions of a lawyer. Hey, could this work? If I wanted to do this, could this work? And then ask the Japanese lawyer, you know, the inverse question, like, hey, could this work? And if he's smart enough to know that I'm keeping my double lives separate and I'm going to divide my assets in my wills, that they will not trump one another, and that they don't begin with language about this, you know, I make this will of sound mind and body and you know, invalidate all prior wills. Uh, you know, one could be read as a codicil to the other. So there could be a way to that it could all work out. But at the end of the day, he still had one employer. And that if the paychecks are coming from Monarch, that's a problem. How he then divided it up, that goes to him engaging in the nefarious conduct. But if there are other medical or other benefits or a death benefit if somebody's killed in the line of duty. Who gets those insurance proceeds? Now, if he was smart enough to figure all this out and there's a death benefit policy for both families, good for him. But that's a lot of planning. Scary amount.
And I do have a theory that the daughter would have one advantage that the son won't. Presumptively, we both seem to think Monarch was somehow created as a result of United States government action. That does seem to be implied at multiple times. So the benefits would be coming from a U.S., the insurance presumptively would be a U.S. insurance company. The benefits would be, the death benefits would probably be U.S. based. All things being equal, I'd rather be in the daughter's position if there were going to be an ugly estate fight, because again, I go back to that point, it's quasi in rem. So the assets, as it relates to the death benefits, are better positioned to fight in the United States than in Tokyo.
I agree with that. But was he smart enough to have policies set up in both countries? But
oh God, you do want to make this tough.
yeah, but again, but the issue is still with the employer, because if the employer had the death benefit, unless you had one that was equal going to the family in Japan, that's still very messy and still could hint at one family being cut out at the expense of the other. So it's just a mess. I mean, don't live life that way. It's like the big, don't be double married.
And I'm utterly certain there are obscure rules that we're not even aware of to address other fraudulent elements of this situation.
Yeah. Again, not my area. I'm the discovery guy and civil litigator, so like this is, what I've looked up, but like it's way outside my area of what I do. But let's just pivot to an issue with Monarch. That looks like a very US based military espionage agency focused on fighting monsters. We have two agents from Monarch go out on their own, so they're rogue, so it's ultra virus. So again, there's no legal authority, and they go to Japan and they kidnap a U.S. citizen in Japan. They assault May in Japan. They go after a Japanese family with like a search and seizure that would have definitely violate the Fourth Amendment. But what authority do they have to force their way into Randa's condo in Japan? Like, there's no probable cause, there's no warrant, and they're doing all of this on their own. I think all of that's illegal conduct. And
I don't think there's it is illegal conduct. And I don't think there's any ambiguity at all.
Yeah, because again, the Japanese government and Japanese law enforcement will not take kindly to the Yankees running around rogue, getting into car crashes and kidnapping people off the street. Like, once they figure that out, they'll be held to pay. So and again, they're violating US laws if they were actually, which still apply to a US citizen. And arguably the Randa grandson would be a US citizen by birthright, because dad's a US citizen because Bill Randa was a US citizen. Junior should have dual citizenship because of mom being Japanese, and his offspring would be US citizens as well. So he should have dual citizenship. But again, it's just messy and weird, and I don't think the writers intended to go that way. But for lawyers, we look at this and go, wait, what? You can't do
Well,
that.
it this actually is an interesting point. I'm not sure that he is a U.S.
What
Do we know for certain the father is a U.S. citizen, or as opposed to a Japanese citizen who's married to a U.S. wife? Because if he's Japanese, the son was born in Japan, and the Constitution only protects the children of someone born on U.S. soil. There are statutes that give you certain rights in the proper circumstances. For instance, if you're born on a U.S. military base to a U.S. father in Germany, you are a U.S. citizen. But that's actually created by statutory birthright. I don't know that it's ever been made clear if the father is Japanese or if he's U.S.
That's you know, we might need more facts. I'll lean towards, since John Goodman's Bill Randa is a U.S. citizen, his son would be a U.S. citizen by birthright.
Almost certainly correct.
But grandson, maybe we need another fact. Maybe we don't know enough information to make that determination. I think there's a colorable argument if the facts line up correctly. Wow. So yeah.
Well, first of all, also another fact, Josh, that is an ambiguity is it has not been made clear that Keiko and Randa were married. It's only been made clear he's their son.
Oh yeah.
That is, I feel that's actually intentionally vague at this point, because episode 1, we see her fate, and it is not implied that they are married at that point.
Yeah. You know, hopefully we find out, because that's
oh, I think that's too important of a fact that we that's the how they have a child is clearly something that's going to come to light in the final 6 episodes.
Well, that, and Shaw, you know, is complimenting them for running Monarch and having a family. Yeah. And I mean, like, not that you have to be married in order to have a family, but that's one of those presumptions that exist. So again, did they get married?
We've seen nothing as yet to say they were, although I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a lot to unpack. Because I was leaning to they were, but if they're not, that's like the rock stars who have, kids with someone, and they've been together for decades and they're not married. It's like, whoa, I was not expecting that result.
Exactly.
You've been together like 30 years, you've had 3 kids, you're not married? Like
but okay. It may not change anything in your analysis that he is a U.S. citizen. The way the statutes work, it still easily could be, because if the parents, at least one, and it's not even clear to me if Keiko is Japanese or if she's U.S. or both. She herself could be dual citizenship. And if their child was born in the United States, he 100% is a U.S. citizen, regardless of their citizenship. And then it becomes a big question where the kids were born and how his citizenship passes as a result of the statutory bases, some of which might come down once again to the question we had 30 minutes ago. Is Monarch a government agency, and is it have the rights of the military? If it has the rights of the military and he was born on a U.S. military base in Japan, he's absolutely a U.S. citizen.
Wow. So again, I don't know if we'll get those answers. I don't know if they are writing for lawyers to go, there's going to be some lawyers watching this and they're going to have questions. I don't know if that's their thought process. Hope springs eternal. But yeah, there's some big legal complexities here.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
I want your theory how in the world Monarch got all 3 of them into Kazakhstan in the middle of the Soviet Union with a U.S. Jeep and no apparent concerns about detection. I want your theory to explain that.
Yeah, that was could be lazy writing. But like that was one of my points with operating in foreign countries, because the easy, the one that has the least problems is Japan. The one that has more problems is Cold War era Kazakhstan. Like, you just don't walk in. I mean, not everything's the Iron Curtain with, Checkpoint Charlie, and a big scary wall with machine guns on it. But just driving in,
In a US Jeep.
yeah, like not even hiding it. It's not like this. It's highly unlikely the Soviets gave permission for, like, yeah, you guys go figure out what secret base that we had there.
And I don't know. You might know this. I do not. Was Kazakhstan the original launch site as it is today for space in the Soviet Union for like Sputnik? Because if it was, then it might have been one of the hardest spots in the Soviet Union to get into.
I don't know. I don't know, and I don't know if I knew at one point, but that's despite my Cold War history love and fascination, I don't remember that at all. Uh, I just know getting into the Soviet Union for two Americans and a Japanese woman would be very difficult in the 1950s.
Even James Bond usually had plots of how he managed to do something like that.
It's like you just don't walk in. Like, where could they sneak? I mean, again, this is where I'm going to have a, show my failure with geography. I'm not even sure what the closest port of entry would be for them to make their way in. And I don't think there's a good one where they could plausibly do this.
I
And
tend to agree. I think it might be Iran, because at that point in time we were allies with the Shah.
yeah,
That would have been my guess as the entry point you would theoretically try to go through.
and that you could drive in, but that's still a lot of fuel to get across Kazakhstan, and hope that no one notices. So
I don't think you can say hope that no one notices. You have to have a mechanism.
yeah, it's just, there's no good way for that to work, unless the Soviets were super bad at security or gave permission. And they did have a giant landmass, so you can't be everywhere at once, and it's pre-drone technology. But still, that's yeah. Again, that's how you can start a war. So we're going to let the two U.S. service members in with radiological equipment and hope nothing goes sideways.
Yeah.
I mean,
1952, Stalin was still alive. Even is more ruthless than you can imagine.
and I thought that incursion was further down the road, like 57 to 59, somewhere in there, which would have been at least Khrushchev, because Stalin would be dead by then.
Yeah.
Still not great. So with that, anything else that you want to raise for the Monarch series thus far?
For all our joking with these legal issues, it's a tremendous series. And and the legal issues it raises are fun. They do not, in my mind, detract. They actually make you. I would like to raise this: the legal issue you have highlighted about bigamy is poignantly and continuously raised in the sense that the two children don't know how to react to each other. Yeah, they are doing a very good job in my mind of showing the human element of that. What I'm curious about is it doesn't seem like either of the two wives are outraged.
Yeah, that's a level of sci-fi understanding that is hard to accept.
I tend to agree. I truly tend to agree.
Yeah, I think there would be screaming and throwing things. That we've only seen the, Japanese mother, and we've heard the US wife on the phone who's been asking questions and uh
Her
in
daughter's largely been avoiding it, telling her what's going on.
yeah, and it's like very annoyed with mom in the tone. Granted, mom did call at some inopportune times, but like I've traveled. It's hard to pick up the phone when you're en route between places to
Yes.
give a status report. Like it's like I can't give you, minute by minute updates. Like that's hard to do. Not impossible, but we do have texting abilities. Like she could text mom and go like, I've landed, provided it's at least iMessage, and being able to say, or or WhatsApp, being able to say, okay, I'm here, and I'm heading over to the condo now. Like that would be a way to at least keep mom informed, who's probably freaking out, you know 6,000 miles away. Or is it, I'm not quite sure. It's over 3,000, because I did look up like distance from Tokyo to Alaska. Because if they were going to show like a cargo ship getting to Alaska from Tokyo, that's a long boat ride of 3,500 miles, and that's a long trip. Like that's a
Well,
very long trip.
um, I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in Tokyo, and it's a from San Francisco, it's about a 13 and a half hour flight. My recollection is it was approximately 5,100 miles, but from Alaska it would be shorter because the Aleutians greatly expand and are much closer to the Japanese islands. But I remember my flights to Tokyo were approximately 5,100 miles. So you were right with your first number.
Okay, so saying 6,000 was not
Yeah.
okay. Been a while. So, um, been a while. All right. Well, we've covered a lot and focused heavily on bigamy, something I never thought I would focus on in a kaiju story. But here we are.
Good. And I still throw out, what if there's a third?
Oh, it just looks good
It's
help.
possible. It's
So get help. Like you shouldn't be doing this. You're hurting people. Get help and stop the negative behavior. And this is where the therapists need to take action and talking about what's making him keep marrying women and fathering children. Like anyway, a lot to unpack there. So with that, everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you listen to us and you enjoy us, please consider leaving a review on whatever player that you've listened to us on. And wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care now.
And stay married to one person.
Agreed.